there is so much happening in AI, especially when it comes to selling data. There's a really big news story that has recently come out, which is that Reddit is selling their data. People have been people have been debating what's going to happen here for $60 million. All of this comes on the back of, I think Reddit kind of shut off its like data from anyone accessing it a while back. So people were kind of saying like, hey, what's going on here? And at the same time, we have Reddit that is actively preparing for an IPO. So these, they really need to show that they have revenue, that they're relevant. They're one of the richest sources of data. Connor, what have you been seeing in this space?
So I'm really curious to hear from Reddit users on this. I'm not a big Reddit user, Jaden. I don't know if you are or not, but I'll say that Reddit feels a little different. So obviously OpenAI and everybody else was training on all this data for so long and not telling anyone. So in a way, this shouldn't really be, oh my gosh, huge news. I think the really big story here in a way, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, is this a good deal or not? That's one of the ones that I'm so curious about. This is $60 million annually a year, and they're locking this up. And as I was sort of like writing on LinkedIn, I'm like, is this more like we're going to look back and like we sold Manhattan for $24 worth of beads? Or is this going to be one of these things where like otter pelts used to go for like a year's worth of salad? You know what I mean? Like, is it the best deal in the world or is it the worst deal in the world? It's going to be one of those two things. It's not going to be anywhere in between. So that is one big question I have. Would love to get your take on that. The second thing is social media and data. I mean, Jason, like Reddit feels different. Reddit feels like, a place where people are like, hey man, like this is our community and nobody's ever allowed in here and all that kind of stuff. And so Reddit, with an IPO coming up saying, we have put a value on all of your stuff, is absolutely fascinating, especially because Reddit users are like, and somebody was telling me this, they're like, oh, this is like my, verbal diarrhea here, enjoy it or something like that, right? So in a way, you're kind of thinking like, well, what are they actually getting out of it? But there's no question that large language models will train by the way, we don't know which large language, we don't know which company bought it yet, or paid this yet. So I don't know, Jaden, like when I throw this back to you on this saying like, it's going for this amount of money, our Reddit users going to be okay. What do we think about privacy? Like, how do you think about that stuff?
At the end of the day, I think this is a good deal. I think this is going to help add a lot of context and value to someone's large language model. I think this is going to be something that's purchased by the top players, right? So Meta's going to buy it. Google's going to buy it. OpenAI is going to buy it. Anthropic, maybe Inflection. This is going to be the ones that have a lot of money. They'll buy it. It'll add, I think, a lot of value. To me, it's almost like the Wikipedia data set where it's just like a huge corpus. It's valuable. It's useful. It gives you like a unique perspective on the world that only Reddit can give you. So I think there's some value there. I don't think a lot of the smaller companies will be using it. What I will say, though, that it makes me think of is contrasting a little bit to like Twitter and what Twitter has done with their Grok model. Because Twitter, obviously also the same as Reddit, shut off access to the Twitter API that OpenAI used to be training, a lot of their ChatGPT off of. But then they never opened it up to anyone else. They just said, no, we're going to make our own AI model. And, they created their own tool. I'd be curious if Reddit would ever do something like that. But the reason that I think it's valuable in that regard is because now Grok on Twitter has exclusive access to the Twitter data that no one else has. And I think in the future, the only thing that's really going to set some of these AI models apart is if they have exclusive access to data. So my only thing with Reddit is like, yeah, it sounds great, $60 million, but I don't think it's like the worst deal in the world, because if they're going to sell the same thing to everyone, it's not like oh, we have exclusive access to Reddit, so we're really good at writing the type of content that's created on Reddit, right? It's just like, well, we have it, but so do all the other big AI companies, so it's not, it's not exclusive. So that's the one thing that I'll say. I don't think it's selling Manhattan for a handful of beads.
Okay, so but let me ask you this on that then, right? Like, I think there's a lot of I mean, again, the jokes coming out are very much along the lines of, look, this is just garbage on there anyway, right? I mean, so like, what are people actually learning? So I don't agree with that at all. I think that Reddit, it has a lot of like, again, somebody was calling it like bro science on there and stuff like that. That is true, but I don't necessarily think that this is how, these giant models are like learning their facts. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's enough of that on the internet. I think they're just sort of like thinking about how do people communicate with each other? What sort of like, what things get the most upvotes, like what's interesting, what's popular, that kind of thing, right? So that's interesting to me. But here's a question I want to put to you, Jaden, too, is that like, this kind of data is hugely valuable right now, right? But like, at what point can Meta and Google and everybody else start to synthesizing their own conversations like this? Because I mean, again, like what is it, like 100 million queries a day on some of these things, right? And so obviously Google has no shortage of info, although there's going to be privacy concerns and things like that. I think that's maybe the big story here that we're hopefully not burying the lead on. I think privacy is huge. But I'm also thinking that, like, as much as people say, like, oh, it's just going to like start eating itself and it's synthetic data, it's not going to be that good. There's no research that actually says that synthetic data is not going to be valuable. And I'm just wondering if at some point there's going to be so much information just entered into ChatGPT that they don't really need outside data. I don't know. How do you see that?
Okay. So yeah, I think that that's a good point. I also think there's precedent for this. You see people like Apple or Google is paying Apple $1 billion a year to make Google the default search engine on Safari on iOS. So I think like those kinds of deals are pretty common. The dirty secret that no one is willing to talk about with this is the synthetic data play that you mentioned, where essentially I could pay $60 million, get an annual pass to Reddit, scrape all their data, put it into my model, and use that model to generate synthetic Reddit data, like a synthetic data set, essentially. And now I don't ever have to pay for it again. And I'm not even probably breaking their terms by like storing, because I'm sure part of their thing is like, you can't just scrape us and store it and have like the Reddit data set. I'm assuming they're like, you pay $60 million, you can use it while you train. When your $60 million runs out, you're not allowed to like access or touch it. You have to delete like whatever you have that's not already baked into an AI model. I'm assuming that's part of their deal. I would have to look at it more closely. But regardless, either way, yeah, there's a future where you literally just create, like you do what Twitter did, where they just created their own Grok model. You just spend $60 million, you make a Reddit model, and now this Reddit model can create unlimited Reddit content with synthetic data. The one thing I'll say that's very valuable about Reddit data, and I guess Twitter has this with Grok as well, but it's not just the content and what is written, it's the it's being able to cross-reference that with how many upvotes a post gets. So it's not just like what people say, it's like what people say that has the most value, and not just the most, and it's like judged by the community. So I think that is a valuable part of the data. So like no doubt about it, it's valuable. But again, there is really no way for them to permanently lock this in when someone can just create a Reddit data set and then create synthetic data. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly where this goes. Now, the one thing that they have, and Twitter has this as well, is you're essentially, after your first year of paying for this, you're paying $60 million, not for the whole data set, because you pretty much already got that. You could synthetically create it, whatever. It's for the ongoing new content being added. So if you think that in the last 365 days, the posts that were posted on Reddit are worth $60 million for the last year, that's essentially what you're going to be paying for.
That's actually a good point. Yeah, I mean, that is what Grok is trying to do right now. Full disclosure, I had access to Grok. I sort of like keep going back and forth on whether it's useful. So if they can make Reddit useful like that, that's true. I do think that you raised the other interesting point, which is this is essentially like feedback, essentially like human feedback, which is incredibly valuable through those upvotes and things like that. And I don't think that's something that can be synthesized with any real fidelity. So I think that actually may be, almost like worth the price of admission alone. Like what are not just like, what are people sort of like, what actually is interesting, but what people think is interesting. I mean, like, listen, the whole political, industry is built atop this idea that it's not like, whether you have the best ideas, it's how you say it and how you present it and all that kind of stuff, right? So this actually may be the real value behind Reddit. So maybe synthetic data doesn't get you there, but I don't know. I'm not willing to write anything off. This has been, I'm anyway, looking forward to following this story going forward.
Yeah, same. Absolutely fascinating. If you enjoyed the podcast today, make sure to leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We appreciate it a ton, and we hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day.